So you can define a function such that the input argument has a default value. So if the function is called without given value for the input argument, the function will assume the default value for that argument. In a simple format, I can have a function like this, similar to what we had before, but now I'm giving it a default value, giving the input argument name a default value. So if I call this function now without giving any value to name or input argument, I get hello guest. Right? And if I do give a value, then that value will replace the default value. So and keep in mind that if I didn't have any default value there and I was simply calling the function without giving any value for the input argument, I would be getting an error, missing one required positional argument's name. Right? It's telling me basically I didn't give any value. So this is kind of helpful if you are developing a code and there's a function that you think in a lot of cases some default value can be considered without giving that value directly, and you don't want to get an error if that input argument is not there, then you can just define a default value for your input argument. And remember, you could have multiple. You could have first name, you could have last name, and something like first name and then last name and the correct one, and then you can say greet. Actually, this is a good case. Let me hover my mouse over this so you can if you have well, you might not see exactly the pop-up option here in the video since I'm just recording the window, but if you see this line there and if you hover your mouse over this input, you see it says non-default argument follows default argument. What does that mean? It means you cannot have a value that does not have a default value. You cannot have an input argument, that does not have a default value coming after an input argument that has a default value. Right? So because this one, the first input argument, has a default value, the second one can't not have a default value. This is just a Python thing. And if I run this code, let's say I don't want first name, I just care about last name, take the first name as default. If I run that, you get an error. I ran it twice, I believe. So I got an unexpected keyword, lname. If I do something like this and I take lname to the first as the first argument and fname with the default value the second argument, right? Suddenly you see that the complaint goes away. Right? If I run that, I actually get an output that last name is Alice, the first name is the default, so I get hello guest Alice. So just keep that in mind. You can have multiple input arguments, name 2, but you cannot have an input argument without a default value coming after an input argument with a default value. So you have to have all your input arguments that must be defined when the function is called first, and then list the input arguments that you're fine with not having a value defined when the function is called. You will not get an error, but you can do after. So this is a Python thing, the way we define these arguments with or without default values, just something to keep in mind.